will do a quick introduction. Thank you everybody for hanging out. I know this is the last session. Grueling day after day. You've been pummeled with data information, technical stuff. And so I appreciate everyone that's managed to hang out. I will say for myself, I came to this and I have a view of the lazy river. And I've never actually done a lazy river before. So every morning I go out, I look at it, I'm like, I wonder if I'll have time. So as soon as this is over, if you have questions for me or anything else, you know where to find me. Because that dream's about to come true. Aside from that, my name is Rick Herrera. For my day job, I am Vice President of Research and Development for Constellation One. I wear many hats. But for today and for the next 90 minutes or so, this is the hat that I wear. And I'm really going to talk about things and push things from a perspective of RESO and standards and how it is that we can help you. The Data Consumer Subgroup, or pain points as we call it, is really our goal is to surface the challenges and the pain points in our standards to help guide RESO and to help continually improve. You know, it's from these pain point sessions and days exactly like today where the RESO roadmap gets created. This is where the items in the agenda that the team works on for the next year, 2 years, it comes directly from you and from your feedback and from this session. It's from these that we heard from MLSs that, you know, it's difficult to know how data and the data workflow really affects my daily job, my staff's job. Why is this important to us? How does it impact us? And so from that, RESO created the Working with Real Estate Data training program. We've heard from vendors and from others on the technical side. People have a hard time sometimes starting off and working with a web API. Maybe they haven't done that before. And so we are creating the technical track for that. It's here at a pain point that we decided that we heard, and from people like me complaining, saying, I hear all these certifications and there's standards and silver and platinum, but when I go look at the data, honestly, I'm just not seeing it. And so yesterday, Josh presented, you know, the reports, the analytics, where we're now querying every major vendor, every major player, and we see exactly what the population is for key fields, for data dictionary, for local fields. And so now we're not guessing, it's fact. And all that came from this. And so we're here to help you. We're here to provide a service to you. But we do need your feedback, and we need you to stand up, and we need you to talk to us about the things that are ailing you and the pain points that you have. And so with that, I'll say I did a little research just to prep for this. And I went through Constellation One. We have about 500 MLS feeds that we work with. And I just looked at how many today are actually web API. The answer was 50. We have about 50 feeds that are web API out of about 500. And I took a look and I started looking through the list, and I see Stellar, I see Emrid, I see all the big guys, you know, the big players that have financial means, capabilities. They've gone through and they've done it. They've taken these big steps. They also have a lot of customers. But I am very curious for maybe some of the middle MLSs and some of their smaller MLSs. And as a consumer myself, a setup's a setup. I mean, if I have to work with a 500 member MLS or a 5,000, it's the same work. So I'm curious, what is it that's holding a lot of you back? From the MLS world, what's slowing you down, or what's causing you to pump the brakes? And so I'll start with that question and see if I can get somebody to step up and just share whatever it is that whatever challenges they faced or what they're trying to get through. Anybody? Thank you.
I'll try. You know, I mean, obviously, first change is difficult. And I think sometimes explaining to a broker why they have to change. And I mean, this is a great change. I mean, to kind of take a proprietary technology and move it forward into something standard. So it's, you know, at the end of the day, it's easier for the data consumers and the broker websites to, I think, have more quality, because you've got a standard platform that you can, you know, you can go out and Google how to do, an OData call and those kinds of things.
I guess the question I have for you, are you still giving out RETS credentials today?
No, we've stopped giving out RETS credentials, but we're still running RETS.
You're still running.
Yeah, so I mean, we're trying to do, we're in what we call a 100-day countdown. That'll probably continue to be 100 days for the next 100 days. But we're starting to email them regularly. We've got our API up, so if somebody comes into our doors today, they certainly don't get a RETS credential. They get an API credential. I mean, for us, I think some of the challenge of launching our APIs was the depth of history of the data. It was easy to get, a competent platform to provide API service. It's when you take a comp from 1998 or something that really is kind of dirty, funky data, and it doesn't play well in the standards. So, I mean, I think, and I got to be the guy who did it. I think I spent 3 months just kind of scrubbing and cleaning data to, have a quality that we would be, proud of to run through the API. And I guess we took much more ownership of the API platform than for us, the vended RETS platform. So, RETS was kind of, at least when you hire a vendor, it was a much more easy button than when, I'm trying to really build a data, a compliant RESO database and take, 20, 30 something years worth of comps and backfill them in. So, I mean, I think we could have gone to market months and months earlier, but every time I step backward, because when I first played the game, it was 2012 data forward, because that's what you're supposed to send out in IDX feeds. But when you think about having, a competent API for everyone, you need those broker back offices with that rich comp base. And, so to basically let the floodgates from, 98, 97 forward flow in, we just found that, what looked like an easy job that could run every 15 minutes now was blowing up the first time I tried to just pump the data in. And then, in many ways, it was almost a column by column fight to figure out, what 12 listings really are just blowing everything up.
So going back and looking at the historical data, the deep stuff, was challenging for you guys.
Yeah, I mean,
but you did it in stages. First by doing, okay, this is the past 10 years, and we can get that out to everybody, and that's clean and structured, and then we go back.
And then we go back, and then we basically make sure that we can just chunk it out in stages. And I mean, it really was to make sure we had quality data, to replace the RETS data that big brokers had pulled and put into their data stores. So I mean, for us also, as we convert them, we're really recommending that they really restart their data stores, because they'll get a better data set at the end of the day. They're not going to get misaligned fields. This feature was supposed to be in this group and it ended up in this group, through one conversion that, we wrote years and years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. Who else? Are others out there that are trying? It's funny. I see smiles. I see some laughter. So we're like, I feel like people have stories to tell, but we got to get people to come up and be brave and make the statements. Or Sam's going to start picking on people.
I'm not making statements. I'm just moving the microphone around, looking for those smiles that have a comment.
All right. Over here, Sam.
Thanks. Hi. For us, we're a small MLS to mid-size, 1,200 agents. And what I found is that we just don't have the education to understand the benefits of switching to web API versus RETS. So we're just told by our MLS provider. And when it's left to that, then the board of directors just looks and says, okay, well, do we need to change? Are we required to change? Because change is hard. We don't want to absorb that. And so nobody makes a compelling argument of why. And from a practitioner standpoint, we don't understand the benefits of that. So I think if there's a move to push this forward, at least in the smaller to mid MLS size, there needs to be some sort of education to go out and reach out and actually talk to those people and say, hey, these are the benefits of why and how it will benefit us, not just you, but maybe the whole real estate industry.
So the education theme continues. We've heard this in the past. I think it's It's one of those things we're continuing to work at, but we probably still need to get much deeper reach into. So thanks, I appreciate it.
For us, we have notified the vendors that we are switching to the API. They are so set in what they already have, they have to schedule development time to redo it, and all those other things that are preventing them from moving over. So even though we notify them 6 months later, they still are in the process of making the transition.
So these are customers of yours pulling data.
Right.
Pulling
And
your data.
they're already built their RED systems. They're already fully integrated with it. Trying to get them to switch to the API has been a challenge.
Yeah, the process of translation from RETs, which very often did not follow data dictionary, and therefore has custom fields, custom names, custom metadata, to data dictionary is a translation layer and a map that needs to get created. There's many ways to go about doing that. I think a lot of that's been created. We've talked a little bit about if people would be willing to share some of that, if we could potentially reuse that. And I think that could help make it easier for the next person. So I know that's something we've looked at in the past and might want to continue to research. And is there a reach out in a way? Maybe you could just drop me a business card later. I'd love to talk to you a little bit more. We could do that. You know where I'll be. Yes.
So, as a broker, we are usually the ones that ultimately end up paying for these changes. And I think that's the issue that's kind of coming across is that if a vendor is using the data, that they then have to make modifications to their back-end systems, they have to figure out a way to pay for that, and kind of because they're selling it back to us as a brokerage. And if they have a lot of entrenched relationships, they're coming back to us with cost increases, and we're pushing back because our margins are getting thinner and thinner and thinner, as we go. With new entrants in the marketplace and things like that. So I think that's probably where some of the pushback is coming from, is because who's going to absorb that cost? And you have a lot of fintech companies and stuff that are also operating on very thin margins, in some cases not making any money at all, that are trying to pass the cost on to brokerages. So it's just a thin market there that I see. And so I think you're going to struggle with that continuously until margins come back in the industry and things kind of get thinned out during this next cycle.
Yeah, I think, we try to promote the value proposition, right? If you're a vendor, if you're a software provider, if you have an app, the advantage to them is really, hey, if you're getting web API, which has to be available, right? So MLSs need to start that process. I think all the major systems at this point, right? So CoreLogic, MLS Grid, Flex Business System, Rapid Honey, they have web API available. I don't know what hoops you have to get through to get it, and I'd be curious to learn that. But the value proposition we try to push back towards the software provider and those that have to absorb some cost, you're right, is think about expansion and think about a year from now and 3 years from now. And as you want to go to different markets, the ease and simplicity of plug and play of having a data dictionary underneath you, of consistency and not so many changes in your data sets anymore and things that cause break. And that's the message we try to push out to them, to say, as you want to grow your business and expand into new markets, it's going to be much, much easier, as opposed to a custom feed over and over and another custom one. And that takes so much more to implement, makes it so much harder to expand. And so that's what we try to push back. But you're right. I mean, if you're on a shoestring budget and you're trying and you're a mom and pop shop, you're living in the now. So I get it. It's a very fair point.
And for our attendees, if you could say your name and your company, if you're comfortable with that, when you bring your questions up, it'll be great for the live stream folks.
Awesome. So my name's Chris. I'm from and I have maybe somewhat of an unpopular opinion, but I'll share it. I feel like sometimes we conflate two issues here, data standards and data transport. And as a downstream consumer, if I have the option of getting a native data dictionary RETS feed or a translated web API feed, I'm going to pick that RETS feed every time. I feel like as a consumer in the products we provide, we do IDX websites. We have big national brokers we do it for. We have small one market agents. And And so when we're talking about on a national scale, absolutely, a standardized data set makes sense because you need that standardized look and feel, filtering, all of that at a national level. On a local level, that local agent probably doesn't really care so much about the standard data. They want what's in the MLS. And so I really don't care how I get the data. You know, as far as REDS goes, we've solved that a long time ago. We can adjust the REDS feed. It's not a problem. The only hiccup there generally is the mapping. And so if it's coming in data dictionary, mapping's done. You know, just like with an API feed. Whereas with API feeds, I feel like a lot of these vendors are still trying to like find their place, and they're still trying to figure things out too. So just because we convert from REDS to API, the work's not done, because then that API vendor might change, and now we're doing another conversion to keep up with the changes on the API vendor side. And you know, I think right now we've got maybe about 80 or 100 REDS feeds running, and the amount of rework I know is coming on those, it doesn't scare me, but it's like, well, we just got to assume innovation is going to stop so that we can move, you know, these REDS feeds, data that's already working, feeds already running, that's already mapped. We're going to have to move them, remap them. And what's the gain for us as a consumer? The kind of like mini Bill Boyer in me says, you know, we're going to get less quality data because now we're not getting what was put in the MLS. We're getting a translated version of that. And all of us data consumers, you know, I know we have found issues in that mapping, and the vendors are always great when we find issues to go and fix those mapping issues. But, you know, at the end of the day, I would love, and, you know, again, another unpopular opinion coming. If I'm pulling web API, I would love to get a standard endpoint, and then I'd love to have like an expand and say native fields or source system fields, where I can get what the raw MLS output is too. Because let's say I'm powering the national website, yes, I'll run that standard data all day. I would throw it through our, you know, data dictionary mapper and be done with it. But then once we roll it out to an individual agent, if I could also build off those local fields and use that local vernacular and have all of that within the API, to me that would be super. So
Okay. No, thanks.
So
We have had that talk, and I think that's great feedback. I would agree. I think there's a lot of need for the local stuff as well. I think it's a long way still before back-end systems get adjusted to where local fields are largely data dictionary, and then there's an exception, and there's stuff that is legitimately local. Okay, I will take that back. I think it's actually a really good idea.
Hello, Rick. This is AJ from Canopy MLS.
Hi, AJ.
So, my pain point is you didn't mention Canopy, but you mentioned Stellar. Okay. And that's messed up. Okay. All kidding aside, it's not really a pain point. It's just more of a recommendation for anyone that's on the fence as far as from the MLS. I converted over 200 vendors from REDS to MLS Grid. So I understand some of the feedback here. But what we did was we just came up with a plan, and we communicated to, and we did it by groups. And IDX was the largest group and well over 100 vendors. And we just came up and we created a nice email that says, here's our plan of action. We are converting, and we included a deadline. But we said, if you sign up for your account by this date, you'll have 60 days to run parallel. And we encourage folks to do that. And then come that time, we would turn off our REDS data feed. And many of them responded. There was a couple of them that didn't, but that's because there was change in personnel. Emails got lost. So when we finally turned them off, they responded about a week later. I mean, but, you know, best practice is to make sure that those entities or vendors have a distribution email. So it doesn't just go to one person, you know. But if you just lay out the timeline, most of the vendors will cooperate. Yeah, they'll have to put it on their radar, but at least you'll get that, you know, transition over. And we sent reminder emails too. When it was 60 days out, when it was 30 days out, and you make sure you edit the subject date to say second request, third request, 15 days, because sometimes the first email gets lost, but once they see that second request on the subject line, they'll be like, uh-oh, we need to move on this. So just wanted to share that with anyone that is on the fence about transition.
So as a whole, though, your initial piece, you set a timeline out. You say 80% of organizations made the cutover.
Yeah. And right now we're sitting at 96%.
Okay. What was your timeline, out of curiosity?
Well, the first group is probably like 1/4. So we gave them 60 plus, so maybe almost 90 days as far as when we sent the first initial email, giving them a few weeks to sign up, and then says, okay, you'll have that parallel of 60 days if you started right away, as far as to sign up by that date.
Okay. And what MLS did you say you're with?
That would be Canopy MLS
There
in
you go,
North
AJ.
Carolina.
There you go, bud.
Don't forget it.
All right. I'm happy to continue on this conversation, but this is an open forum. I started us there, but we are free to talk about anything you guys want to talk about. You came here trying to learn, and what are your pain points? What ails you? What can we do better? We are officially in pain points.
You're apparently a character that others emulate now, so do you want to start us off?
So in regard, I'm Bill Boyer with Sync, and kind of going on to the thing about vendors getting MLSs to move to Web API. There's national consumers like you and me. We have hundreds of MLSs. Switching to a Web API is not a big deal anymore. We already have systems in place. I think one of the concerns, going with what David Williamson was saying, is that you have a lot of regional mom and pop people who don't have the staff, the resources to be able to do it. And I don't know how you get past that challenge of getting these people who they're doing it one off for a broker, the broker's doing it in-house, and how to get them to be able to switch to it without having a lot of pain.
That's why I thought that the comment from AJ was so interesting. It says, we give people notice, and what it happens. It becomes a priority when it's a priority. And if it's not, maybe it doesn't. Just a thought.
It's like the utility companies, when they turn off the power, yeah, it does become a priority. So.
Okay. Open forum, guys. Come on. What do you got? What's your one annoyance with things?
Nobody's going to sponsor mimosas in the future if you don't get your voices out here. So Olga's here. You did a great session today. Like, what are folks looking for in their MLSs? Are you having difficulty getting UPIs into your listings, your data shares, your listing inputs? What are you having issues with?
Remember, you asked for it. I don't know, who should I face? A small recommendation to encourage early adopters. When we vote things into the standard and we publish the standard and companies like ours adopt it and implement it, let's try not to deprecate things and not to change things too much, or maybe be conscious about backward comparability, right? We saw in UPI work group presentation today that we're thinking about changing M to 5 digits. And the response I got, well, what's a big deal? You just change one little part of UPI. Not a big deal. A lot of things is not about a big deal. It's about what you don't do instead of doing something else. So that's something I think we should keep in mind. I think somebody mentioned innovation stops when we redo things, and that's important to keep in mind. So that's my comment. Changes will have to happen, but as we work on this, let's keep backward comparability in mind and encourage early adoption by, keeping things more or less stable.
So I know, thank you for that. I agree. The change makes work. And Rob announced earlier they're trying with Data Dictionary to move to a more annual approach, We'll take the feedback in. We'll make the changes once a year. We'll ask for an update once a year, and everybody can plan on just a little bit of an update once a year. Is that a good step or a bad step? Does that help? Does that hurt? Yeah, I'm asking you. Is that too frequent, not frequent enough? Because we'd also want to be cautious of just being stale. So
I
where's the
would
right
not
place?
measure it in good and bad, right? This is very subjective. Good for whom? Bad for whom? Right? So keep this different perspective in mind. And I want to, again, support the earlier speaker, I think. When we do something, it's always at the price of not doing something else. And that's where I'm coming from. If we are beautifying something or making something a little bit better, we have to assign this value, business value, with how we speak in agile process engineers will understand me, right? What is the business value to implementing a specific change? What is the gain to our subscribers, to our agents, right? Somebody said, well, we turned off the feed and in a week they responded. Somebody's website was stale for a week. That's a big deal for someone, right? So things like that is what we try to keep in mind when we evaluate which change makes sense to do and which does not for us. I hope I'm answering your question.
Makes sense. That's great.
As vendors, do we still need to think about VOW versus IDX? Or is VOW basically something that kind of merged with IDX? We don't need to worry about that anymore.
I think he's asking you, not me.
I think it's an open-ended question.
It is very much an open-ended question. Anyone want to respond to that?
So I think one of the things going to happen with NAR's recent rules with showing commission rates and all that stuff there, I can see possibly more people wanting to go back to vows again because they might not want to show that kind of information. So but yeah, I agree. In most places in the U.S., it's a big deal. In Canada, IDX and vow are really different because most Canadian brokers do not participate in IDX. So that's still a very important thing on the Canadian side also.
Thanks. And what would be the recommendation? Just to request for VOW, and then the MLS will tell us whether we should be asking for VOW or just go with IDX? What would be the proper way of approaching this? Because ultimately, if we want to build a virtual office website, if that's the intention, and nobody is talking anymore about VOWs, then is this a relevant conversation really? If since that evolution of IDX really has opened up a lot of the fields and nothing is really being hidden behind the registration wall, so maybe it's a moot point at this point, right?
So Rebecca Jensen with IMRAD, but one idea, and it's just an idea, so don't kill me, but is like the difference between VOW and IDX or just whatever the MLS field subset is that they don't want to have displayed on consumer websites, right? So it seems like a different way to look at this is to have some structure to start applying business rules per field level, because that would be one sort of a business rule. Can you display this publicly, yes or no? And I've also been told by brokers that there are other fields that they use, for example, in their back office brokerage systems that might also have brokerage business rules built in, like can an agent edit this field? Does it have to go through these different processes? So I was talking, is Matt Cohen still here? I don't know. Anyway, Matt's, most of you guys know Matt. He said that we already have some sort of a business rule structure. And then I was talking to Paul Stuziak, and he's like, yes, but it's not going to do that. And so I don't know all of the technical details on it. And again, this was just an idea. And to say, hey, do we just need to have something at the actual field level that addresses that? And maybe that would do what you're talking about with VOW and IDX. Anyway, I don't know if I'm explaining myself well, but
I think I could speak that for a second, Rebecca.
Thanks. I see that there is no consensus on this. So
We actually do have standards for this. We have a way to express more complex business rules in a machine executable manner. It's something that's implemented now by a number of providers. I think most of them.
Josh,
That's very complex.
volume. Closer. Sorry.
Talking a lot the last couple of days. Those rules are very complex. Those are meant to be like a program, basically. Not all cases need that kind of structure. There's something called the field resource, which is being moved forward to the data dictionary right now. And that's a very appropriate place to start defining some of these kind of rules. We can say, at the field level, can you search this field? Can you update that field? Who can see that field? And that's a much more, it's an easier path for us to iterate on than to try to get everybody to write rules, interpreters, and parsers. So I think that this will be moving forward in the data dictionary in the next couple of meetings, and I would encourage people who are interested in that topic to attend. Thank you.
By the way, everyone, that was Josh Darnell, our CTO.
The guy went to me cigars last night.
Cool. So, Chris again from Redacted, and for a long time I was.
I think we're going to cut off the number of times you can speak until you say your company name.
Okay,
Keep going.
So I'm with Showcase IDX. I was formerly with FMLS for a very long time, and I feel like this whole VOW IDX thing is kind of an issue in our vernacular, because I know when I was at FMLS, a lot of times I would ask for a VOW feed, and I would say, "Oh, you're building a VOW website." No, we just want sold data. And I feel like it's kind of like the condo thing. Well, are we talking about condo ownership, or are we talking about condo as in a multi-unit vertical structure? And so I love Rebecca's idea. I don't really know implementation details and all of that, but if we could move away, and I know that it's a very big ask that we move away from that, VOW IDX to explain what we want to do, and moving to like public, private, like how is the field, what can we do with the field? Because I do feel like, especially around VOW, there's a lot of confusion when somebody asks for a VOW feed, and they're really not doing a VOW website. They're just looking for like expireds and withdrawals. And, along those lines too, the MLSs that offer the IDX feeds without the sold data, even though I think that's been mandated for a long time, like that, no offense out, I see IDX Plus and Trestle, and I just rage inside every time. So no, there's no such thing as IDX Plus. It's all IDX. But
Al McKelman, CoreLogic. The VOW versus IDX thing is more of a business problem for me. It never really interested me all that much, so I'm going to switch topics a little bit to one of the things that I think we keep hearing a little bit and coming up in pain point conversations off and on, which is the handling of custom fields. That's a favorite of Bill's to bring up.
The handling of what?
Custom or local fields, whether they should be commingled or whether they should be part of a separate resource. I personally am in favor of having them as a separate resource because I find that it allows more uniformity across multiple markets. When you end up getting metadata that you're trying to search across 10 different markets and you have to deal with individual fields that only exist in those markets, it just becomes a little more complicated. But there's certainly downsides to having it separate as well. If there's a single field that you need in the what we call custom property resource, you're having to either expand into it, which is probably the ideal way and was kind of how it was intended, or if you're using RETs, replicate both of those entire data sets. So you're doing full replication of 250 million listings twice just to get that one field. So there's definitely some pros and cons to it, but I do think this is one of the things that is still holding us back in adoption, is the ability to have a single standardized way to handle these custom fields across the board.
So we had a subgroup March 10th, and this was actually one of the topics that we talked about, we brought up. And we asked consumers, from the consumer perspective, what do you prefer? When we look at the data that's out there right now, custom fields are generally a mix, and it's kind of 50-50. Either it's commingled, and so that means when I query property to get my listings, I have all my standard definitions, and I have the custom fields just in that same request, and it's all together. The other option is it's a separate resource. So the listing, I request property, I get my listings, it's only the standard fields, and then I have to make a second request to a different resource that has all your custom fields identified, field name values. And so they're separated, but you can still join them together. You can use expand and pull them together. The general feedback from consumers was they actually preferred commingled, which I was kind of surprised. I was on the other fence, on the other side of my fence myself, but it is something I would like to hear more about. It's a great topic. It's something we're trying to come up with the right standard on. It might also be one of those things where the ship's already sailed, and there are so many implementations that we can try to define a way to support the two ways and put some standards around it to make it easier for people to programmatically get this information, right? So it's not quite as custom. But I don't know that we're ever going to pick one or the other. But again, that's for you guys to decide. That's for the body to decide. That's not a choice I make or Josh makes. So I'd be curious for anybody else who has thoughts on this.
So this is why these meetings get fun too, because we get into OData, expand conversations with transport, and half the room is going, what are we talking about? And it's okay. But also, Matthew wanted to take things back to the IDX versus VAL, but if you've got more comments on this subject, let's do that as well.
Sorry, this is Matthew from Stellar MLS. I did want to comment on the IDX VAL conversation a little bit. I don't think it's a technical issue at all here, as the gentleman over there was mentioning. I think as an MLS, you have an issue with the use cases and how much data you provide to all data consumers because of security ultimately, right? You have the responsibility to protect the data. And as long as we can create that trust and have an easy way to track and identify any breaches, it's always going to be a conversation we're going to have, right? About the legal pathway, which is the contracts and what use case you can use for. And that's always the hurdle. So if there's a solution out there that says, hey, I know exactly where my data goes and who is the person who's distributed it, because you only need one case that's going to topple the trust of your customers for your MLS. Unless you find a way to have a good solution to track this properly, we will always run into this problem of wow, IDX, different use cases, who can see what should be displayed publicly and whatnot. Just wanted to add to that.
So Rebecca Jensen again. So on the use cases, on the individual field level, I think that you're right if you're talking about display only. But when we start going down the path to ad edit, that's where some of the business rules are going to need to be defined. And I mean, I'm thinking we could start, and again, I don't know what's existing today, but like on a field level, if it's a restricted field, say from the MLS, that's a different type of business rule than if it's restricted by a broker. So for example, a lot of MLSs have different layers of permissions, whether an agent can edit a list price or if they can switch a listing from one agent to another, right? The broker can switch the listing agents frequently from the MLS level. But what does that look like inside of the brokerage? Because then you have teams, and teams can be reassigned within the brokerage. And so when you're talking about transaction management and interoperability, there are some fields that need to make its way onto forms, and then you have a transaction coordinator that wants to make sure that all of the paperwork matches what's in the MLS and in the brokerage back office system. So I'm just trying to say that individual fields can change permission level depending on who the actor is that is using that individual field. So anyway, that's why I think that it's more than just a permission and a legal thing. And also that attorneys don't necessarily talk to the technology people all the time. So anyway.
So this is a focus of our board. And by the way, that's our board chair, Rebecca Jensen. Big hand, everyone, please, for the work that she does for us. And you'll hear this from the board members who are your representatives going forward. Is they're looking for business outcomes. What's your business problem? What's the outcome? Maybe it's for us to solve. Maybe it's technology, maybe it's a standard, maybe it's for another organization, but we're going to discuss these things, and then we'll work with our other partner organizations when it's a business issue, it's a standards issue, it's a policy issue, and we can work with those organizations to figure out the outcomes you're looking for in your business. So don't feel afraid to say something that doesn't seem like it's related to the specs we're talking about in these work groups. Really, any issues you're having with technology, that's what we want to hear here.
We have James, I think, over there.
Hi, excuse me. James Wayne from REAI. As a whole industry as a whole, I think it's always better we try to be proactive rather than reactive. So we see the lawsuit coming on from DOJ for the antitrust on the commission side. So those are the things I think a lot of different aspects that we can put into consideration how going forward we can prepare from a technology perspective. On the other side, we know that ADA has regulations say every listing you have to have a multimedia like image or videos. You need to have a label, but we see very few or even no MS actually have a label now in the listing. So going forward, this could become a big legal issue ahead because we already see some big portals being sued by individual lawsuit, not class lawsuit yet. On the other side, there's also problems on the labels because some people might just use normal off-the-shelf products, so the accuracy is very low. So once you have a bad or wrong labels, is it a bad thing? You can say, I meet ADA needs, but you provided a wrong label. So we need to have a good label, but also what's the real purpose of label? We need to provide like more insight and make the listing better. So I think as a whole, we might want to see how we can create the listing standard to make things better. Like nowadays, we see so much variety of ways people listing things. Some people put a few image and put it together as a video. It's not really a video. And do we really want to require that every listing have a video, or what kind of standards in a video, and how many numbers of images, and this image need to be a certain standard? So those kind of things, it's not like mandatorily we have to address right now, but I think going forward, we had to put them into consideration because we've been observing, we're working on this field a long time, and I think either way there will be a problem for us ahead. If we don't address it, we might get into ADA like a lawsuit. If we address it, but some people provide wrong label, that's also bad. But even if we provide a good label, right labels, what's it really benefit us besides addressing the regulatory or compliance needs? So I think we have to find something that really help us, and agent or listing or MS all benefit. Thanks.
So I think I heard a couple things there. The one is, are you saying that every website's supposed to have labels for your photos? Because I was not aware that's the case. Is that
long
true?
term, it should be because per ADA,
So it's not today, but long term it could
be. Some big portal already get sued for that. They were saying in a big suit, it was like in New York City, one guy is visually impaired. He sued, I think, Homes.com and Zillow and a few others. They're saying, looking for property, but because I need to use text-to-voice software to listen, and because there's no labels, so I could not get information from the image, and I sue. And those big portals just pay them because there's no way they can defend it. Another big lawsuit was in Miami, same thing. A person was visually impaired, he sued them. So when they bring out the ADA regulations, there's no way you can defend because you are basically not complying to it. It doesn't come a massive level yet, but I think sometime it will come. And maybe soon, maybe a little bit later, we never know. But when we look at the DOJ case, this week and all this new development, I think as an industry as a whole, we better somehow be prepared in a way.
Thank you. I appreciate the feedback.
Yeah, and NAR has feedback on that and guidance for broker websites and other websites in terms of ADA compliance and the kinds of tests to go through and how to respond to any sort of litigation that you might receive in that space. So that would be the resource to go to.
There was a hand over here somewhere.
Yeah, hi, Catherine McIntosh from realestate.love. And when we were talking in one of the breakout sessions about kind of looking at an interrelated industry map, it was really interesting in our room because we had large MLSs, small MLSs, vendors, people on the periphery of the space. So we captured a lot of pain points. And some of the main ones that came out was this idea of it's not just a data feed, but a licensing feed. There isn't transparency with all the various 530 MLSs of just what the rules are. And so that just came up as a pain point. What if we could know like what rules are applicable to what MLS? And I think probably Rebecca's talking about that at the field level, which is so exciting. So the second thing is that data share, so exciting, right? All of a sudden agents have the ability to be part of a data share in there where their boundaries touch, so it's smooth, but that doesn't translate to downstream data consumer experiences. So say an agent is sending information to a CRM. Now, the minute it goes out of the MLS data share, all of a sudden the CRM, an agent has to actually join all three of those MLSs and pay fees in all those MLSs to have that product work. So it doesn't work the same as the data share. And then what's interesting about that complaint, you would think that that came from the CRM, but actually MLSs put their hand up and said, yeah, that's a real problem from us because we want to use a single application to do everything. And it's not aggregated or working at a level of a single product. So all of a sudden, there's, say, often venture funded products that get used instead of products that are coming from the MLS. And so in a way, the lack of communication is making MLS is less relevant because in a way the MLS is key. A next example is the unique property identifier. Basically, if the MLS, as Olga was pointing out earlier, and Joel could provide a unique property identifier at the listing level, it would help so many other services, whether it's showings, offers, etc. So that was brought up again. And I noticed an example for us is aggregation of sale history on a listing. For example, 38 Beaconsfield is a house in Toronto, and then 38 Beaconsfield R. It's the same property, but it's the coach house in the rear. So all of a sudden you don't see that aggregated data because there isn't a UPI on the property history. And those are the main findings that we had basically from our group.
Thank you. That's a good list. Anybody want to comment? I have right here. Can we get you a microphone because the people online can't hear? So.
Margaret O'Sullivan with CoreLogic. From the standpoint of the data shares, when we implement data shares, it's the business agreement between the two groups to decide what can be distributed or not distributed. Almost everybody has like a mobile app, and the agents are using that. By all means, that vendor should be able to get that data, but it has to be talked about, and it's the agreement between MLS and MLS. So it's not the vendor who won't let them have the data, but for the most part, you don't, because they're already sucking the data from two different places. But in this case, you want to have that kind of agreement. So if there's a problem there, work between and make it a business situation, not a technology item, because technology-wise, the information can go out.
I'll speak from consumer perspective with regards to data shares, and a lot of talk about NorCal and the consolidation. In a lot of ways, it's great. It can be very helpful, but it's really only helpful when it's everybody. So when it's not everybody, then I'm still pulling some stuff individually. I can't really rely on the data share because I'm not getting all of it. So I still have to pull from everybody. But now I'm not only pulling from 7 MLSs, I've got overlap of 5, 6 MLSs, or 80% of that data in each one of them. So each one of those just grew 500%, but none of them are complete. No one is really entirely complete. And so we end up with a lot more duplication. We have Degubian logic. There's things we have to do then to try to figure that stuff out. So it's great in one sense, but it's great when it's everybody. When it's not everybody, it actually just creates a lot of listing bloat, a lot of duplication for us. But that's just the consumer side. There's a lot of business reasons and other reasons to do things that make a lot of sense.
Cool.
If I was on the floor, I would have said that. Generally, I don't speak from up here, but I threw that one in.
All right. Just a couple things. Rob Reed from Elm Street Technology, and I just want to react to a couple of things that's been suggested here. First, I think there is some needed discussion around IDX and VOW, because I think to some degree there are antiquated containers for the data out there, giving the appetite for the space. And I would welcome the opportunity to talk about a more universal data feed. And to our esteemed president's comments about putting that into multiple data feeds, I would say, oh dear God, no. Have the information in the field level in there and what you can do with it. Put it in one feed, please. Good. Yeah, just bake it into the data. That would be great. Because at the end of the day, the last thing we want to do is have more feeds to manage out there for different uses. Bake the use into the actual data. And then the other part for our breakout is let's have a discussion about unifying some of the license agreements for the data and the compliance rules that you all employ. And I get real estate is local, and in some instances you're going to be handcuffed by local statutes that you have to abide by. But if you've got a rule that's not tied to a local statute, I equate that to a brick and a wall that you're building around your data. In the words of our great President Ronald Reagan, let's tear that wall down. Thank you.
I just wanted to go back to what Margaret was saying about the data shares and it being sort of a business decision. I think and I'm Sam, I work for Compass. I think what we've seen is the data share implementation can be sort of an afterthought for the data consumer. So how the data consumer gets that information is something that happens or is decided down the road. And so I would encourage anyone thinking about implementing a data share to think through exactly the impact on data consumers, because I think the end result is that members of that MLS are going to be impacted if their brokerage, their tech is not working 100%. And shout out to Olga and Joel, who have been very helpful with us sort of getting up to speed on the whole RE and NorCal Alliance changes.
So just a little throwback moment here, because I know it's the end of the week and people are probably a little tired, but just a reminder what you're all talking about with the one data feed was something that you all did, started that idea in St. Louis 2.5 years ago at the broker advisory and then into the pain point session. So Rebecca's point is how can we add to that? And we'd love to hear that from you. Other organizations moved the policy forward. They made that happen. But your input to CMLS was huge. Your input from the technology vendors to NAR is a big thing they're seeking as well, to talk about policy timelines and when things can be implemented. So that's really what these sessions are for. There's some big things you've done out of these sessions that have really impacted the industry, but we can keep moving those along.
All right, next topic. Do we have more? Do we want to keep going?
Rick, I hear the lazy river call.
I didn't hear you.
Andrew Binkley, Constellation One. One of the concerns we heard about sharing data and sort of the licensing terms is it only takes one bad actor to let the data out, and so we have to be pretty careful about where it goes. And I'm wondering if there's a cryptographic solution to this that would be worth considering. So if you know where the data is coming from through some sort of public key, private key system, whether that would address some of the concerns. And that's probably a question for the MLSs.
Correct. Anyone want to respond? Thoughts? All right.
History lesson, we actually had a product called List Secure that was available 20 years ago. So yeah, that would be interesting concept to do that. But I think it was brought up, I think, by one of the Remax gentlemen the other day is trust. And I get there's going to be one bad actor that's going to spoil everything. I think to your point, Matthew, but there are other people out there whose intentions are pure and want to be as transparent as possible. It's just we get cast in the wrong light out there. And we'd love to welcome those discussions about your data and how we're safeguarding and protecting that data out there. But again, we don't want any of these artificial hurdles. The data should flow freely. It's the currency of the 21st century here. So I would welcome that discussion, whether it's technology or some other thing. It just needs to flow freer, because that free-flowing information is going to really incentivize and foster innovation, which is ultimately going to be better for this industry out there.
And we've had, private conversations, right? Bar talk about how do you validate or maybe pre-verify someone who accesses data regularly. Is there a way to do kind of a pre-check approach where, you've done due diligence, you've seen the products, you know who they are, they're expanding into additional markets, but that they've kind of already been pre-vetted. So you don't have to quite go through the entire lengthy process. And sometimes it's a lengthy process to get access to a feed. That's an interesting topic. I thought, I'd love to find a way to crack that nut. I think that'd be super interesting to make sure that you know where it's going, you know it's secure, you know what it's being used for, because those things are absolutely critical. I understand that. But also try to find a way to make it a little more easily accessible and use technology and things to help solve those problems. So if anybody has any thoughts on that, I'd love to hear that, the pre-check and the pre-verification.
So Rebecca Jensen with MRED again. We did look at the pre-check system, and this is a case where our attorney talked to our technical people, and the attorney said, be very careful. It's a good idea if you're granting access, but the problem is if you tell somebody that they're not on the pre-check list, and then a neighboring MLS says the same thing, and then the next one, now all of a sudden you're into antitrust realm, and is it really worth it to risk that, especially given the earlier comments about all the lovely lawsuits in our industry right now. So that's why MRED decided not to go down the pre-check list. But I am always, concerned about data security and making sure that people aren't, sharing their credentials. So I like the public and private key idea. And at the same time, to Rob's point, with data wanting to flow freely, Sam, was it like 80% replicate, I think is the stat, right? So once it's off the MLS server, then, how do we enforce that replication not being replicated to somewhere else that doesn't already have a license with it? That's kind of the issue that, and really that's server to server, but I'd heard a rumor that, scraping is still going on. So not quite sure what to do about that.
So I'm not sure I've ever heard a lawyer who didn't say be cautious.
However, Mitch said stop saying pre-check. So just being nice. Guys, laugh. It's no big deal. It's the last day.
But I do wonder, from an MLS perspective, I get where that could be a concern. But I wonder if a third party couldn't do it. If an independent organization, a company with security background, or some other type of entity couldn't step in and say, look, I have a criteria, I'm measuring it, this is all that it is. And I don't know, I feel like there's an opportunity there somewhere, but
our guidance so far has been to add information where we can, but not grade bad good. So we can add information about relationships between organizations, and if a vendor's working with 35 MLSs, that's important information. That's something that we can help other MLSs say, these folks, value judgment within your organization. If it's 10, 5, 35, 300 MLSs, that's for them to make. But we can certainly help people with that kind of information.
Hi, my name is Katie. I'm with Zenlist. And I just wanted to add kind of my agreement that trusting vendors is kind of like a risk I think MLSs should take. My job when we go into a new MLS is to like start that conversation, and I'm very transparent. I have like, I let them compliance test as an agent, as a client using our product. And I know that I have to do this because there are a lot of hurdles in place to get the data that we want. And we know why those hurdles are in place, but just because there are bad acting vendors in the space, that doesn't mean that every like new and small vendor like myself is going to try and capitalize the same way. I use the analogy a lot when I'm explaining to like our new engineers why it's so hard to like get into markets. And what I try and do is, just because you get food poisoning at your favorite restaurant doesn't mean you should swear off restaurants. You should still have like a certain level of trust with vendors. So like, if a vendor is being transparent, or like I always offer like references from MLSs that we work with. And like we work very closely with MRED, and, we follow like all their compliance rules. And so I think like, having like trust in vendors is really important. So I just wanted to agree with what you said because it really resonated with my day-to-day life.
Thank you. All right. Do we have more topics? This is your opportunity. This is your chance to share. So if not, I'm going to say going once, going twice.
I've got one, I think.
Go ahead. I stopped. I saw you. I stopped.
If nobody else is going to do it, I guess I'll say something. So, one complaint we hear a lot is that even though some of these servers are pretty fast, people are getting throttled pretty regularly. Most of that's being done so that people don't reseed their feeds every day, which costs providers a lot of money. It's very inefficient. Maybe there's some way to advertise what the limits are in a better way so that people know when they're about to reach the end of it, because it doesn't matter how fast you make the API. If you can only pull 200 records and then you get throttled, that's not good. So this is something that comes up in transport a lot. People have asked for standards to deal with this, but I was curious in the room if people had that issue.
Yes. I was 2. I second. 3, 4, 5.
So on the consumer side, what would you want to see here? I mean, obviously unlimited speed would be great.
But not realistic, and I understand that. That's fair. And people have to protect themselves from, denial of service attacks and that kind of stuff. But is there a way to get a warning or to kind of get an alarm? There are different solutions. I mean, what are some different things that are going out there? So, Joe, somebody want to get Joe a mic? Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I didn't see. Go ahead. You have a mic in your hand. Go for it, and we'll go to Joe next.
Brad with Maris MLS. I just wanted to throw out an idea, and it may not be popular, but a time to live attribute on the data set. Data privacy is always going to be an issue with the end consumer and with the MLS for that matter. So when you've got photos that may have been pulled from a listing 2 years ago and they're still floating around on a website, you've got a new homeowner that, well, at least from 2 years ago, that is now upset that it's out there. And vendors do their best, but it's always a reactive situation. What if we had a time to live? Maybe it's a set number of days, whether that's half a year or wherever it may land. But just the idea that you go back in and when the time to live dies off, you go back and repull that data. I mean, sure, it's a bit more of an expense for all sides, but in the end, if it protects the privacy, maybe it's worthwhile.
Okay, that's an interesting thought. I can share a story there. When I was at my old company, we received a notice to take down photos on a particular listing. The homeowner had been robbed, and in court proceedings, it was said they used our website and those photos to scan the house and to go through and to know how to walk through it, and they ripped through it really quickly. It can't happen. I mean, obviously, any technology, any tool can be used. At the same time, though, it is one of those things. It's a very rare edge case. It's a thing that doesn't happen often, but I understand what you're saying. As far as time to live, expiration on listings, I know many MLSs have these rules today because I know we have to purge stuff at certain intervals for certain MLS feeds, and those are part of the business rules and things we have to do. from a consumer perspective, when I put my consumer hat on, I don't like it. But I do understand to a degree. TTL, we don't have a TTL. I think right now it's just handled as a business rule, but I did take a note on it as far as entering something of this nature into the actual payload and the standards. And it's worth the discussion in one of the groups. So I've been taking notes this whole time, and so I've got 2 pages here so far. And what I do is I go back with all the notes that I've taken to the work groups, to transport, to data dictionary, and everybody else, and then I bring forward all the stuff you guys have said. So if you see me scribbling, that's what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. Joe was going to say something, I think, and then Olga's hands up.
I just wanted to chime in 1 second on that
Sure.
in the photo issue, because that hits very close to home for me especially when I was at FMLS. And I feel like this is more maybe like something CMLS or somebody that's more MLS focused should tackle, because we always operate under the assumption, or I guess the mindset, that those photos don't belong to the new homeowner. They belong to the photographer or the prior broker that uploaded them. And so really what happens to those photos is up to that broker. Now, whether or not the MLS wants to put policy on distribution or how long those photos can live, like I want everything I can get for as long as I can get it, and then go from there. But that almost feels like once some other body makes a decision on what we should do with those photos, then we can kind of address it technically. But that's kind of my thoughts.
Hi, Joe Sergi. Going back to MLS credit. Going back to the rate limit throttling conversation. Obviously, we know why some folks need to be rate limited, and there needs to be data caps and stuff. We have some at the grid. We scale with the size of your, customer base. How many MLSs are you in? But I would say the 2 things that we find are occurring the most, despite the fact that we actually have a usage logs tab in your account as a vendor, so you can watch your own activity and know what's happening. And the fact that we email you on the hour a warning if you're coming up to the line and getting yourself into trouble, is that nobody seems to be paying that close attention to that, or the 429 error message I return to you when you hammer me into the ground. So in that regard, yeah, rate limits exist, data caps exist. Some of you guys have come up to me in the last few days and been like, can I get a bump? Can I get a bump? Yes, you can. Rate limits, data caps are a floor, not a ceiling. We need to have a conversation about it. You need to come talk to us or Al or whomever is providing you the data, and let's have an open and frank conversation about your usage, and let's tailor it to the specific needs, and we'll compromise and we'll meet in between. Asking me to open up the floodgates and allow you to drink from a fire hose, unfortunately, is just not something is feasible for us.
Yeah, and I'll add in, for my conversations, we had to have that conversation at a certain point, and we got turned off, and it was brutal and it hurt. But once we had the conversation, everything was fine, and was very happy and accommodating to help us out. But we're also talking to, I don't know, at least 30 different providers of data, right? The one-off MLSs, people have their own servers, the major vendors. And so, yes, I can go check an MLS grid dashboard to find out where I'm at. But the other 28 probably don't have it. And even if they do, I'm still checking 30 dashboards. And that's pretty rough. I mean, I don't know how you do that. It's just not manageable. So some standards around what a reasonable set for reasonable replication looks like doesn't sound like a bad thing to me. But again, this is why we're here. So should be on. Just give it a second. You'll raise the mic.
Still not working.
Did you flip the switch? It's dead. It should just be on.
So we do actually have a technical solution for this to some extent. Not to suggest that we can always solve things with technical solutions, but part of the reason why people hammer the servers over and over again is that the techniques right now for replicating data are not very good. And we have a standard, which for those of you who use Kafka, it's basically an interface of a log. You just play it forward. And so you don't have to necessarily go back and reseed your feed every time. This is what gets people in trouble with these vendors. So, if that's something that people are interested in, we have a proposal that was very widely voted on. I think we had 150 votes for it a couple years back. And we need to move something like that forward. And if that's not the right proposal, we need to iterate on it so that people aren't just like hammering these servers all the time. Thank you.
So I don't have that much issues with throttling. Sometimes it's my own fault. My team screws up, a pod goes crazy and hits it. I'm kind of glad Joseph emails me and says, Bill, you're taking down our system once in a while. And, you know, even whether it's Trestle or MLS Grid or some of these other ones, like this time here, I was talking to Joseph out in the hallway and I said, yeah, we'd love to have the throttle open. He looks at it and he says, oh shit, you have this many MLSs you're pulling from and I really need to bump this up for you. And it just did it right there on his phone and helped us on it. So, I mean, again, when you do have it, you should talk to the MLS or the provider and say, hey, you know, we are hitting this. This is what we're doing, and work with them too. Just not make the assumption that the throttle is there because of you're doing something wrong. It could be a multitude of things. And again, we all hit this too, where an MLS, for whatever reason, decided to upload every single listing in their system, and we all had to pull at the same time, and that's caused its own issues too with the providers too. So again, hitting those throttling limits because of those changes.
Yeah, and we've talked about best practices and potentially finding a way to create a user guide. We are working with real estate data on the technical side to start to provide guidance to new people on how to actually work with data, how to do efficient queries, how to talk to people in a effective and responsible manner. Because I know there are a lot of players out there that just don't know. And when you first enter the marketplace, and you're trying to work with data for the first time, it's different. Real estate data is a little bit different than other things, and so I hope that will help some too. But what exactly that rate limit and what those standards should be, I think is something we still need to bring back to the groups and talk more about.
It sounds like how to replicate is a good topic for this
How to replicate,
technical training course.
So Alan Kelman again with CoreLogic. I will say with our platform, we show our quota limits in the headers, the response headers, which has been pretty successful because people can tend to check those programmatically and act on them if they need to. But similar to what Joe said, you know, we scale both on size of the account and the number of connections that you're actually making. And we do offer the ability to upgrade to more quota, but most people don't take advantage of that. And like Bill was mentioning, and most of the time it's because something is being done incorrectly in the actual script. It's looping too fast, or it's just hitting an endpoint that's dead, and that sort of thing. So I think the more transparency we can add into what those limits are will help data consumers be able to use it more effectively.
Can we loop too fast?
Server says you can.
So it sounds like
if I build a serverless system in Amazon, I can loop pretty fast. But it's
Al, I don't know if you're willing, but maybe you're willing to write a spec. I mean, we've had the request to have that information added to the standard feeds. So maybe we could turn this into specification. That's something that's working for you.
Sure. Yeah, we'll look into it.
I just wanted to add Joe Chamberlain from High Country Association. From an association standpoint on the photos issue, we've been dealing with that just recently in our board because we've had 3 requests just in the last year from buyers wanting to remove. And we actually, it's becoming an issue because we're trying to decide who we're going to allow to have our souls out to. And the souls, basically, we were trying to put 1 photo in there. So this has become an issue for us to decide how many photos we include, who do we give the souls to, because we're finding more and more of this happening where people are calling us and we can't control. Once the photos are out there, we can't call them back. And so it is becoming an issue just from a perspective from a local association, and we're not that big of an association. So I have to believe this is more than just us.
Yeah, I mean, if I put on my RESO hat, I can easily see where adding a TTL and saying, okay, we've decided a homeowner just called, because the photos are out there already. So homeowners called, you got to take it down, putting a date on that changes the modification timestamp. Now I know I have to take it down, and there's a rule that says I have to do so. As a consumer, I hate that idea. But I understand where you're coming from. Technically, I'm sure it can be done.
Can I say something? RESO has a solution for that. I'm going to draw attention. Data Dictionary just recently, maybe not even so recently, added permission field to media resource, which has a flag private versus public. We implemented it just, I don't know, a couple of months ago. And we allow our agents, after the listing is sold, to go back within a few days on the request of the new buyer or so they have to work with a buyer agent and mark specific photos not to be shown on consumer sites. So that's technical solution, right? Per photo, you have this flag, private versus public. On MLS side or association side, we had to create a rule that data feed customers have to respect this flag, suppress it from public sites, remove it from display. They can still have it for back office systems. This photo is still available in our matrix system, etc. And I think the hardest part was not the implementation. It's just the flag, not a big deal. The hardest part was exactly working with each of the data consumer to find a room on their roadmap to implement this flag. Again, back to when standards change, when we put out different changes, they also had to be prepared to implement this on their end. So that was actually probably the biggest challenge for us. But there is a way to address.
So one of the things we've seen, because we deal with hundreds of MLSs, is a lot of them, when they get sold, you're only allowed to show one photo. It's the first photo. It's the front of home. That's public domain information. I mean, you go to Google, you can see the front of home of any house. And that's what we've seen a lot of MLS start to do recently, is to say, hey, now on our side, we have to programmatically say, if it's sold, we only show that first photo. But I mean, that's been the way we've been seeing a lot of MLSs handle that problem.
Catherine here again, realestate.love. Just on the note of the photos, for example, what we do is we're always taking the last update to the MLS. So for the comments here about they've got a consumer request to just make the one photo on the front and get rid of the interior photos. Any new request from the MLS, if it's already a sold listing, but we got a pics updated, it would just overwrite that listing and the new listing would be with one photo and the other ones are gone and we don't keep them. Like, it's just always as per the MLS. It would be amazing if the agent could have a version where they could keep them and see them in order to evaluate the value of properties later and have that in their repertoire and have an agent log in and a client log in. So that would actually be a great thing to have that flag, Olga, and be able to do that. But that's how we handle it. So we're always doing exactly what the MLS requires in that regard to meet the demands of the consumer.
So I think we see both sides of it. I'm Marcus Matheson from CoreLogic. And to that point about adding that field into the media resource that says this is private, what we find challenging with that is we added it to our system, and the vendors that we work with that pull our data, we can teach them about that, and they're smart enough and they've had these problems. They've worked with it, they get it. But to teach the rest of the entire industry that pulls that data, the ones that have just those simple feeds of data, that's a monumental effort. And it makes it that much more harder for those groups to get into the systems, because here's your feed, here's the giant document that goes along that explains every single rule that you have to do, all these calculations, all these formulas, everything else. They're like, then why did you give me all of this, right? Like, just give me what I'm allowed to use and do. And so in our implementation, which is coming out shortly, we went both routes. We have the data in the resources. We can make that available to the vendors that are capable of processing that. On the flip side, for the simple consumers, their photo count is going to go to 1, and their timestamp's going to change, and so their automatic process, it'll just flow to them. They simply get one photo. And that when that gets implemented, they have to do nothing. It will just work for them. And so in our system, we're allowing agents to be able to set those flags private, and then the system just takes care of it. So we've sort of absorbed the complexity of that to make it easier for those downstream consumers. Their system just works.
Is that a global setting or is that a by customer setting? So
Well,
an agent versus a broker versus a public website.
Make the market private while it's active, but it'll still show because the status of active is allowed to see all the photos. And as soon as it flips to sold, it'll move the photos the other way.
Okay.
And it's
by status, because obviously different statuses mean different things. And the people inside Matrix or product, they can choose whether or not all the agents inside can see them, even though they've told the vendors to delete them.
And the
Because
agent gets-
appraisers and people like that still need the photos.
Okay, so the agent still gets to decide that. Okay.
And that was just the one point I wanted to make was like, we need to be careful about the fields we add and the rules we add to try and train them, the entire industry out there, to use that. If we can do it in such a way where it just, through their normal feeds, it just works for them,
right,
it's a way better way to get that acceptance, and it's way easier to get people in.
Yeah, makes sense. Gotcha. All right. I think that is going to wrap us up. Let's see how this goes. So FYI, just a couple plugs here, and then we'll wrap this up. We will be doing on June 8th another pain point session, a data consumer group session. So please reach out. You can reach out to me directly, support@reso.org. We'd welcome you. We had 22 members last time, and honestly, I'd really like to see that number double. We can provide updates and notes on what we happened today and talk about what items we're taking forward, what's going into the work groups. And so I can provide an update on that date. And then, of course, there's the analytics group. And, Josh showed some really amazing stuff. And I think you're going to be really excited about that. And so we're looking for volunteers and people to help out with analytics. We want to understand we have all this data now. What is the richness? What does it look like? How can you leverage it to help your business? And so reach out to us, ask us, talk to us. Again, just reach out to support@reso.org. And with that, thank you very, very much. Appreciate it. We're done. Thanks. I get to go live my dream and go do the river now.
You do. Lazy River time. Thank you, Rick. Thanks to Constellation One for sponsoring. You don't want to hear much more from me. So folks who stayed on the live stream, thank you. We are registering for our next conference in the fall in St. Pete Beach, Florida. So you can go to our website and register for that. Big win, big week for us. Congrats to all of you on the new data platform. Thanks for spending the time with us. We'll see you soon.